Chapter 4. Soaring. Riding on the back of the dragon was amazing. After a good night's sleep, it was the perfect way to start the day. Although the prince was his usual grumpy self, even he seemed to enjoy it. Getting him to admit such, however, was unlikely. Draxon was nothing like the group had imagined him to be. Personality-wise, anyway. Saving them from the orcs was not the only kindness he had paid the group, and given his attitude towards them, it would not be the last. "So, Draxon, where do you think your parents are?" Draxon asked, curious as to whether or not he had any leads. "Honestly, I don't know. That's why I go around looking for them," Draxon replied sadly. "You travel around? Does anyone see you?" Adeline asked, surprised by his answer. Draxon chuckled. "Not that I know of. Maybe the frost trolls, perhaps. I usually travel high in the sky at night and rest atop a frozen mountain during the day." "And you just happened to be traveling by us when you saw them?" the prince asked, suspicious of Draxon's intentions. "You can drop the detective act, sire," Adeline began, frustrated. "If he wanted to kill us, he would have already done so." The prince huffed and crossed his arms. Bad manners and circumstances had left the boy soured. Draxon felt sorry for him. Adeline did as well. She, however, opted to employ a tougher kind of love. "Who is this Lord Hogarth? Why does he want you all dead?" Draxon inquired. "That's a long story," Draxon replied. "The short version is that Hogarth and his underdwellers have taken the capital and plan on killing all the humans." "And that's why you need to find this wizard," Draxon concluded. "To help you?" "Yes," Adeline remarked. "He used to be the court wizard. Things went south when the king banished him and all the non-humans from the land." "Doesn't sound like a nice king," Draxon commented. Adeline tapped him, shaking her head, indicating that what he said was not appropriate given present-day company. Prince Azetar noticed. Draxon held his breath, ready for another heated argument to ensue. "You're right, Dragon. He was not," Azetar agreed. "When Mom died, he turned bitter. To me and the whole land. Especially towards the non-humans, who were the supposed culprits in starting the great fires. Fires which killed my mother." "But," Adeline began, shocked, "I thought you were of your father's opinion that, publicly, I was, yes. Father made me hold his view, but I have never truly held it. My best friend before the great banishment was Monique, a blue elf." "I'm sorry I've been so harsh, Prince," Adeline apologized, sensing the boy's pain. "I deserved your angst, Adeline," the prince replied, a spark of maturity flashing within him. "I've been mean, for lack of a better term. I guess, like my father, I let my sorrow and anger overshadow any goodness I have to my character. That and, well, jealousy." "Jealousy? Of us?" Draxon asked. "Yes. But you're the prince," Draxon replied, astonished. Azetar chuckled softly. "It's not all that it's cracked up to be. You have parents that love you, that value enough to spend time with you, that invested enough in you to send you out on this mission. I wasn't even allowed to run in the castle for fear of hurting myself, let alone hold a sword or a bow." "Guess I never thought of it that way," Draxon pondered aloud. Adeline placed her hand on the prince's shoulder in a comforting manner. "Starting tonight, we'll change that. I'll teach you the bow, and Draxon will teach you the sword," she informed him, smiling. "Really?" Azetar asked, perking up. "Really," Adeline replied, chuckling. As the sun set over a beautiful horizon, the group decided to make camp for the night. They were almost to the Shadowlands, and Draxon warned them that traveling over them, even for a dragon, was dangerous, particularly at night. Resting at the Shadowlands' edge, the group made camp with what they had left. The prince grabbed kindling, while Adeline grabbed berries and other plants she knew to be edible. After an hour of patient hunting, Draxon was able to kill a rabbit for dinner. Draxon, wanting his newfound friends to be safe, formed a wall of ice around the group in a circular fashion. After a small but scrumptious meal, it was finally time for Azetar's bow training. He could barely contain his excitement. While he and Adeline practiced, Draxon and Draxon watched from afar. "Sorry I couldn't find enough rabbit for you, Draxon remarked. Draxon laughed. "Finding a few hundred rabbits will be quite the task. Besides, I ate a few days ago." "You must be starving," Draxon concluded. No, dragons only need to eat every few days. Near a dead tree, Adeline began Azatar's archery training. After a few demonstrations by Adeline, Azatar was ready to try out the bow for himself. Sadly, his back muscles were not. You've got to pull harder, Adeline instructed. I'm trying, Azatar replied, struggling with the bow. We may have to do some strength training before we start your archery training, Adeline perceived. I can do this, Azatar continued, still struggling. Starting to cramp, he finally gave up. Disappointed in himself, he handed the bow over to Adeline. It's okay to fail at something, Prince. Natural talent, doesn't build character, Adeline reassured him. What does my character have to do with archery? Well, Adeline began, some say that archery is the purest expression of life. To take aim for the mark. If you miss, you learn and try again. If you hit the mark, it's because you earned it. You labored and focused to achieve that accuracy. So when you finally hit the mark, Azatar, you'll have done so because you worked for it. Azatar smiled. Does that make you feel a little better? Adeline inquired. Yes, actually. I've never really been given the chance to earn something before, he admitted. Adeline led the prince back to the group. Draxon stood to greet them. Craxon remained prone, slowly drifting to sleep. That was quite an archery lesson, Draxon remarked. That was a quick archery lesson, pardon me. We need to do some strength training. Figured you'd want to join in, Adeline replied. Before Draxon could respond, a terrified screech echoed across the forest. Something was right outside the wall of ice. The shuffling of footsteps could be heard from where the group stood. The sound increased with each passing moment, indicating that there must have been dozens of them. Judging by Craxon's snarl, the visitors were not friendly. Chapter 5. Ablaze. After killing the king, taking the rest of the city was easy. Hargoth reveled in the fact that his years of planning and gathering resources had finally paid off. Almost all loose ends were tied up. Almost. The prince needed to be found and eradicated. While he lived, a chance for the humans to rise up against them was possible, even probable. An army would unite under the rightful king as opposed to some rogue leader. The first place Hargoth searched was the home of the king's guard, who had spirited the boy away for safety. After interrogating multiple people, he finally had the information he desired. Riding up to the cottage home, he already had a suspicion he would soon confirm. Stepping into the home, he realized he was right. Boytar Stargazer and his family were gone. In a rage, Hargoth pushed through the door and jumped up onto his mount. "Where should we go to look for them now, sire?" Groth asked, seeking to quell his master's anger. "If your men had been the archers you promised them to be, Groth, you would not be asking me that question," Hargoth roared. Unsure of how to respond, Groth continued to try and appease him. "A group of scouts I sent to the western woods have not yet returned. Perhaps that is a sign, my lord." "A sign of what? Your men's further ineptitude? I can already sense that the humans are mounting a counterattack against us. Between that and the dissension among the human sympathizers in your ranks, I'm beginning to wonder when this will all fall apart on me." "Perhaps the scouts are tracking the prince successfully," Groth reasoned. "There's no way to be sure until we receive word," Hargoth replied. "What would you have me do, my lord?" Groth asked. "Burn it." "Burn what, my lord?" Groth inquired, confused. "Everything. The city, the countryside. Drive the humans out, and slay anyone that stand in your way. Any people that stand in your way." Groth bowed. "It will be done, my lord." Boytar had gathered who he could to the east wood. Many had been able to escape the city in time. Many, however, did not. Some of the underdwellers who did not agree with Lord Hargoth joined them. Together they gathered to aid one another. Boytar and the other leaders hoped reinforcements from the eastern wall would be able to assist them. Few, however, could be spared in protecting their borders. Despite this, Boytar knew that the shock of recent events did not stifle their ability to act. From around the small towns and outlying cities in the area, people of all walks of life came to aid their cause, eventually to avenge their king, for now they needed to organize and plan. Visti was doing her part as well. Everyone was. Despite the city being overrun, rations and provisions were carried away as the people escaped the city. More organization, as opposed to provision collecting, was required. We need to reclaim the capital. If the Polcheks to the east hear of the news of our loss, they will use our weakness to their advantage, General Bispo recommended. I agree, General Dentar replied, but with no reinforcements from the eastern wall, our forces will be evenly matched. The deliberation lasted for hours. While this continued, Boitar waited outside the tent for their decision. Despite not agreeing with what he had done with the prince, they knew Boitar to be a voice of the people. If their plan was to work, they would need his backing. As the meeting continued, a scout rode into camp. He rode with a fury, his horse's nostrils flaring uncontrollably. By the look on the scout's face, Boitar suspected dire news. "Specialist!" Boitar cried, getting the scout's attention. "What is going on?" "They've burned the capital. Their army is marching this way." Spiders. Hundreds of them began to rush the ice walls which Craxon had made. Craxon, wanting to protect his friends, circled his oblong body around the three. Draxon grabbed his twin blades, Adeline her bow, and Azetar a common sword the group had taken from one of the orcs. They took defensive stances and made ready for the attack. The spiders could not crawl up the wall directly. Instead, they had to stack themselves upon one another in order to scale it. The ice was too slippery to allow any other method available to the creatures. With relative ease, the spiders had made their way inside. Craxon froze the first wave that came with his frost breath, then the second. By the seventh wave, there were too many to account for, and by far too many to deal with. Hundreds of large arachnids had flooded into the circle. Craxon thought to fly off with the children, but it was too late. The spiders were all over him and the children. Despite their resistance, the spiders' will would be fulfilled. As suddenly as the spiders had come, they had vanished. With seemingly no rhyme or reason to their madness, they crawled away back to wherever they came from. They disappeared into the Shadowlands, the sound of their footsteps growing more and more faint. Craxon, not noticing one very important detail, breathed a sigh of relief. "Is everyone okay?" he inquired. "The prince," Draxon remarked. "Where is he?" "He was just beside me," Adeline cried, fearing the worst. "The spiders took him." "No," Craxon moaned. "I can't believe this happened." "We need to get him back," Draxon replied. "We need to find out where they took him." "Can you follow his scent, Craxon? Can you sniff him out?" Adeline asked. "I can try," Craxon replied. "But in order to follow his scent, I can't fly. I have to follow it here on the ground. We'll have to walk through the Shadowlands in the dark." None of them liked the idea, but they had little choice in the matter. Even Craxon, a great and mighty dragon, was scared. If the prince was to be found, however, they would need to walk right into the heart of darkness. "Let's not waste time, then," Draxon replied, ushering the group forward. Craxon led the way. Following the scent allowed the group to follow a more cleared path through the forest. The Shadowlands were dense, full of thickets and vines and the like. Not even the moon's light could penetrate through the intertwined trees that made up the wood. The journey was scary and full of frights. Terrible creatures moved around in the darkness, many not bothering to hide their presence. The trio could feel eyes watching them every step of the way. Not wanting to attract further attention, the twins opted to light a torch to guide their way. Not to light a torch to guide their way. Rather, they rode atop their scaly friend and prayed with all their might that their search might be successful and that their prize might be safe. "Something feels different. I think we're out of the thicket. It almost feels like we're in a clearing of some sort," Adeline remarked. "We are," Craxon confirmed, his keen senses giving him the luxury of knowing this to be the case. Not long after stating their observations, the group once again heard the sound of hundreds of little footsteps. The spiders were scurrying all around them. Additionally, they now heard the sounds not just around them, but above them. The spiders had created a blanket above them to block out the moon's light. Then they crawled back to the surrounding trees, lifting the curtain which blocked out the moon. Hundreds of spiders surrounded them completely. It was a terrible predicament to be in. The spiders had seemingly led them right into their trap. "This is bad," Adeline whispered, looking around her in a panic. "Do you think you could fly off if we need to?" Draxon asked, directing his query to the dragon. "I wouldn't do that," a voice from the darkness called out. Emerging from the shadows, a raven-haired woman dressed in all black approached them. She had a fair complexion and was quite beautiful to the eye. She looked to be in her mid to late 30s. "Why have you lured us here?" Draxon asked, demanding an answer. "Because I need your help," she replied. "Why would we help you?" "Because," she began, waving her hand to the spiders, "I have your prince." Scurrying to meet their lady's demands, the spiders brought the prince forward, bound in webbing from his neck to his toes. His mouth was gagged. His eyes displayed his panic. "What do you want with him?" Adeline inquired. "Nothing," the raven-haired woman coldly replied. "What I want is something you all can provide." "What do you want us to do?" Draxon asked. The kidnapper smiled. Draxon could tell she was not to be trusted. He was good at reading people. "A group of bandits have invaded these lands, leaving a path of destruction in their wake. I want you to deal with them, in whatever manner you want. Just get them out of the Shadowlands once and for all." "Why not deal with them yourself?" Adeline wondered aloud. "You seem capable." The raven-haired lady's face soured. "Fire." "What do you mean, fire?" Adeline inquired. "Every time my spiders get close, the bandits set the forest ablaze. You all have a solution to that," she replied. "My frost breath," Draxon deduced. "Precisely," she confirmed. "And if we do this, you'll let the prince go?" Draxon asked. "Of course," she replied. "That's the deal." "And if we don't?" Adeline countered. "You're a smart girl," the raven-haired woman remarked. "You'll figure it out." "How can we trust that you will keep your word?" The raven-haired woman grinned deviously. "You can't,"